Detective Mark Jensen had never imagined his next mission would be moving into a sleepy suburban neighborhood. After years on the city streets, chasing criminals, and facing danger head-on, all he wanted was a place where the loudest noise might be kids playing in the cul-de-sac or the distant bark of a dog. But peace was not exactly what greeted him on Maplewood Lane. Mark's new home stood at the end of a quiet street, lined with identical cream-colored houses, manicured lawns, and white picket fences. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked perfect on the surface. But Mark knew better. Beneath the tidy exterior lay the kind of small-town politics and power struggles he'd always tried to avoid. And now, he was smack in the middle of it. His prized possessions sat behind a reinforced gate. On the side of the house, a sleek, compact helicopter. Not just any helicopter, but one equipped with the latest police surveillance technology. It was a rare sight in the middle of a suburban HOA community, and Mark had taken every precaution to keep it under wraps. After all, no one outside of his department needed to know he had access to such resources. As Mark unpacked boxes in his garage, he felt a prickle of unease. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Marjorie, his new neighborhood HOA president, walking her golden retriever down the street. Marjorie was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes behind thick glasses, and a reputation for being strict, unyielding, and borderline obsessive about the community's standards. Marjorie stopped abruptly, her gaze locking onto the helicopter's silhouette behind Mark's fence. The moment stretched uncomfortably long as she stared, lips pursed, hands tightening around the dog's leash. Mark's gut told him she was already plotting something. "New here, Detective Jensen," Marjorie called out with a voice that was friendly, but edged with authority. "I hope you'll find Maplewood Lane a welcoming community." Mark smiled, trying to keep things light. "Thanks, Marjorie. I'm looking forward to it." Marjorie nodded once, but her eyes never left the helicopter. "Just remember, we have rules here. Things like noise, vehicles, and property appearance are taken very seriously. We wouldn't want anything disruptive." Mark's smile faded slightly. "Of course. I'm mindful of the neighbors." Marjorie's lips twitched, but she said no more as she continued on her walk, leaving a chill lingering in the air. Later that evening, Mark stood in his backyard, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The helicopter sat quietly under a tarp, its engines cold and still. It was a symbol of both his career and his hope for a fresh start, but now it felt like a magnet for trouble. The next morning brought a surprise. A letter slipped under Mark's front door, official-looking and typed in crisp font. He unfolded it carefully. The HOA had received multiple complaints about unauthorized vehicles and excessive noise disturbances, demanding immediate removal or concealment of the helicopter. Mark's mind raced. How had they found out? He'd been cautious. The letter felt like a warning shot fired across his bow, a signal that Marjorie had already rallied the neighborhood against him. He knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary HOA dispute, and the quiet neighborhood he'd hoped to call home was about to become a battleground. The morning sun had barely risen when Mark Jensen heard the sharp knock at his front door. He wasn't expecting anyone so early. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he opened the door to find Marjorie standing there, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp as ever. "Detective Jensen," she began, her voice crisp and businesslike. "I'm here to conduct an inspection of your property. There have been complaints, quite serious ones, about your helicopter." Mark blinked, surprised. "Inspection? I didn't know the HOA was conducting inspections today." Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. When the community's comfort is at stake, we make exceptions. Mark sighed, stepping back reluctantly. All right, come on in. As Marjorie followed him toward the side yard, Mark could feel her gaze burning into the tarp that concealed his helicopter. She circled it with an intensity that made him uneasy. This wasn't about rules anymore. It felt personal. This helicopter is unconventional for our neighborhood, Marjorie said, flipping through the HOA rulebook as if searching for the perfect justification. Noise, safety concerns, visibility. You must understand how this could unsettle residents. Mark forced patience into his voice. It's rarely used, Marjorie, and only for official police operations. That's exactly what I need to verify. She tapped the clipboard. Do you have documentation proving it's registered as a police vehicle? Mark hesitated. Revealing too much could complicate his cover as a regular resident, but in this small suspicious community, withholding information might only fuel Marjorie's crusade. He pulled out a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it over. Marjorie skimmed the papers, her expression unreadable. Very official. Just then, a group of neighbors had gathered nearby, watching the inspection with thinly veiled curiosity and some open hostility. Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly lady, from across the street, muttered to her husband, "That thing belongs here. Doesn't seem right." Mark felt the weight of their gazes, half judgmental, half fearful. Marjorie caught the glance and smiled triumphantly. "Detective," she said with forced civility, "I'm afraid the board is inclined to request that the helicopter be either concealed more thoroughly or removed entirely. These neighborhood covenants exist to preserve our community's character." Mark's jaw tightened. It's concealed. The tarp covers it completely, and removing it isn't really an option. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. Then we'll have to explore other measures. A shiver ran down Mark's spine. The words felt like a threat, thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Later that day, Mark received an anonymous message on his phone. "You don't belong here. The helicopter has to go." The note sent a chill through him. Who was behind it? Marjorie, or someone else in the neighborhood emboldened by her campaign? That night, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He double-checked the locks and peered out the windows toward the shadowy outline of the helicopter. What had started as a quiet dispute was escalating into something darker. Determined not to back down, Mark called his police liaison. "They're making this personal," he said. "I need advice on how to handle the HOA." His contact warned, "Be careful. Small communities can get toxic fast. And this sounds like more than just a property dispute." The next day, Marjorie called a neighborhood meeting, inviting all homeowners. Mark knew the real agenda: to turn public opinion against him and his helicopter. As the crowd assembled in the community center, Marjorie took the stage. "We're here to protect the integrity of Maplewood Lane," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "We cannot allow noise pollution and unauthorized vehicles to disrupt our peace." Mark stood in the back, his eyes scanning the faces, some friendly, some wary, most uncertain. He raised his hand to speak, but Marjorie cut him off with a sharp glance. The room buzzed with murmurs and whispers, tension crackling in the air like static. Mark realized this fight was far from over, and Marjorie wasn't just an adversary. She was a force determined to drive him out, no matter what it took. The clock struck midnight when Mark Jensen's phone buzzed sharply on his bedside table. Groggy, he grabbed it and saw a text message flashing on the screen. "Something's happening outside. Hurry!" His heart leapt. Who could be sending this? Was it a prank? Or worse, had Marjorie already moved from words to action? He slipped on his jacket and crept quietly to the back door. careful not to wake his dog. The neighborhood lay dark and silent, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the cool night breeze. But as Mark approached the side yard, a faint glow caught his eye, a flashlight beam moving stealthily near the fence. Two shadowy figures crouched beside the helicopter's tarp, their faces obscured by hoodies. One wielded a crowbar, the other carried a hammer. Mark's breath caught in his throat. This was no neighborhood dispute. It was sabotage. Steeling himself, he moved closer, trying to get a better look without revealing his presence. Suddenly, the tarp shifted, and the glint of metal revealed the helicopter's rotor blades. The intruders were about to cause serious damage. Mark swallowed his fear and called out sharply, "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" The figures froze, then bolted into the shadows. Mark sprinted after them, but they vanished between houses like ghosts. Frustrated and furious, Mark returned to the helicopter, pulling back the tarp. His stomach sank at the sight. Deep scratches marred the helicopter's sleek surface. One rotor blade was bent, and the cockpit window had a spiderweb crack. "This isn't just vandalism. It's reckless destruction," Mark muttered, examining the damage by flashlight. He searched the ground nearby for clues. Footprints, dropped tools, anything. His eyes caught a small piece of torn fabric snagged on the fence, a clue left behind by one of the saboteurs. Mark's mind raced. Who could have done this? And why? Marjorie's hostile campaign suddenly took on a darker dimension. Was she involved in this reckless act? The next morning, Mark reported the incident to the local police precinct. His own department. The helicopter was an official police asset, and damaging it was a serious crime. Detective Sarah Malik, Mark's trusted colleague, arrived quickly. "This is worse than just a HOA squabble," she said grimly. "Someone deliberately tried to disable a police vehicle. That's federal jurisdiction." Mark nodded, tension knotting his jaw. "I need to find out who's behind this before it escalates further." Meanwhile, word of the sabotage spread through Maplewood Lane like wildfire. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, some shocked, others suspicious. A few rallied around Marjorie, convinced the helicopter brought danger to their doorstep. At the next HOA meeting, Marjorie feigned outrage over the vandalism, casting herself as the community's protector against reckless outsiders. But Mark saw through the act. He caught her eye across the room, and there was something unreadable in her expression. Was it guilt, defiance, or something darker? Determined not to be intimidated, Mark stepped up to the podium. "This helicopter belongs to the police," he announced firmly. "It's part of a broader effort to keep our city safe, including this neighborhood." The room fell silent. Some faces softened in understanding. Others hardened in disbelief. Marjorie's lips curled into a cold smile. "That may be," she said, "but it doesn't mean we should accept danger in our backyard." As Mark sat down, a sudden commotion erupted at the back of the room. Someone yelled, "Look, the helicopter's back there. It's been damaged again." Mark's heart pounded as he rushed outside. In the dim light, fresh scratches marred the fuselage. This time, someone had cut the fuel lines. The neighborhood's fragile peace had shattered completely. The sun barely peeked over the horizon. As Detective Mark Jensen stood staring at the latest damage to his helicopter, the fuel lines were slashed clean. A deliberate act of sabotage that could have led to a catastrophic fire. The quiet neighborhood he once hoped would bring peace now felt like a war zone. Mark knelt down, examining the cuts with a practiced eye. This wasn't random vandalism. It was carefully planned, targeted destruction. Someone was trying to send a message. But who? And why? As neighbors began to gather, their faces painted with a mix of shock, curiosity, and unease, Mark knew that time had come to reveal more of the truth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a GPS tracker, hidden deep within the helicopter's frame. "This," he said, holding it up so the crowd could see, "is why this helicopter isn't just any private vehicle. It's equipped with technology used only by law enforcement." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Whitaker, from across the street, whispered to her husband, "It's real police equipment." Marjorie's face tightened. Her carefully maintained facade cracked just enough to reveal a flash of something like fear. Or was it anger? She quickly composed herself and crossed her arms. "This doesn't change the fact that it's disruptive," Marjorie insisted, her voice hardening. "Many residents still feel threatened by it." Mark shook his head. "I understand concerns, but destroying police property is a crime, and it jeopardizes our safety." The neighborhood was divided. Caught between suspicion and support, some residents expressed regret over their earlier complaints, realizing the helicopter played a crucial role in their safety. Others whispered that the police had no place in their quiet streets. Mark's thoughts churned as he surveyed the scene. The torn piece of fabric he had found earlier lingered in his mind. It hadn't matched any ordinary clothing. It was a distinct pattern, something he'd seen before during investigations. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Mark pocketed the fabric and headed to his home office. Pulling up a map of recent criminal activity in the area, he cross-referenced it with known gang patterns and suspicious individuals. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Mark's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about neighborhood rules anymore. He was being threatened. Just as he was about to respond, his phone rang. It was Detective Sarah Malik. "We've been reviewing footage from nearby security cameras," she said. "You might want to see this." Mark hurried over to the precinct. On the screen was blurry, but revealing footage. 2 figures sneaking around his property at night. One wore a hoodie, the other a jacket with a patch. The patch caught Mark's eye immediately. A symbol linked to a local vigilante group, known for taking justice into their own hands. "Marjorie's not the only one involved," Sarah said grimly. "This group has been active around the city, stirring up trouble." Mark's mind raced. Was Marjorie colluding with this group? Or was someone else using her crusade as a cover for darker motives? Determined to uncover the truth, Mark knew the next move had to be careful. One wrong step, and the neighborhood's simmering tensions could explode into something uncontrollable. That evening, as Mark prepared for another long night of surveillance, he caught a glimpse of Marjorie watching from her porch. Her expression, unreadable. The battle for Maplewood Lane was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The community center's fluorescent lights flickered faintly as the HOA board gathered behind closed doors. Marjorie paced nervously, clutching a folder thick with documents, complaints, financial reports, and carefully crafted speeches. She had spent weeks building a case against Detective Mark Jensen and his helicopter, convinced that removing it was the key to restoring order on Maplewood Lane. But not everyone on the board shared her enthusiasm. Thomas Green, a reserved man in his early 40s, with a calm demeanor, leaned forward. "Marjorie, are you certain this course of action is wise? We're dealing with a police asset here, not just a noisy toy. If this escalates, the consequences could be severe." Marjorie shot him a sharp glance. "Thomas, the community demands action. Those scratches, the slashed fuel lines. Someone's risking lives here. If we don't act, the neighborhood will fall apart." Another board member, Gloria Whitman, nodded in agreement. Besides, I heard from a reliable source that Mark Jensen's presence here isn't just about the helicopter. He's involved in some sensitive investigations. Thomas frowned. That's just rumor. We shouldn't base decisions on speculation. As the debate grew heated, Marjorie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smirked. A message from an unknown number read, "Keep pushing. We've got your back." Her smile faded when Thomas noticed it. Who was that? Marjorie hesitated, then quickly pocketed the phone. Just a concerned neighbor. Thomas exchanged a wary look with Gloria. There was more beneath the surface, and they both sensed Marjorie was hiding something. Meanwhile, Mark Jensen wasn't idle. After the disturbing footage, linking a local vigilante group to the sabotage, he dug deeper into the HOA's recent activities. The layers of tension and suspicion peeled back to reveal an unsettling truth. Financial irregularities in the HOA's budget, unexplained expenses, and possible kickbacks connected to certain contractors. Mark shared his findings discreetly with Detective Sarah Mullick. "It looks like someone on the board might be profiting from these disruptions," he said. "If Marjorie is working with them, the whole thing's a setup to scare me out and cover their tracks." Sarah nodded grimly. "We need proof, and we need to expose it before things get worse." Back at the HOA meeting, Marjorie presented the board's official stance. The helicopter must be removed immediately, or the community would consider legal action. But as the tension peaked, Thomas stood up abruptly. "I'm calling for a pause on this decision," he said. "We need transparency and a full audit of the HOA's finances. This isn't just about a helicopter anymore." Marjorie's face flushed with anger, but she masked it quickly. "Fine. We'll hold the audit, but the helicopter still has to go." The meeting ended with no resolution, the neighborhood more divided than ever. That night, Mark received an anonymous tip. "Check Marjorie's recent contracts. Look for the missing millions." His heart pounded. The quiet community he'd hoped to settle into was unraveling into something far darker, where personal greed, fear, and power played a dangerous game. As Mark prepared to dig deeper, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Marjorie wasn't the only puppet master in this drama. Detective Mark Jensen sat in his dimly lit home office, the glow from his laptop casting long shadows on the walls. The documents he'd just uncovered were damning. Invoices for landscaping, security upgrades, and maintenance services paid by the HOA that didn't add up. Several contracts had been awarded to a local company, owned by none other than Marjorie's nephew, a small business that suddenly seemed flush with cash. Mark's mind raced. The sabotage, the aggressive push to remove the helicopter, and the mounting pressure on him, all pieces of a larger puzzle. Marjorie's crusade wasn't about peace and order. It was about protecting a financial empire built on fear and deception. He forwarded the documents to Detective Sarah Mullick with a terse message. "We have leverage." Sarah replied swiftly. "I'm running background checks on the contractors and their connections. If Marjorie's involved, this will expose everything." That evening, Mark decided to confront Marjorie directly. He found her at the neighborhood cafe, sipping tea as if nothing were wrong. "Marjorie," he began, sliding into the seat opposite her. "I know about the contracts. The money trail leads right to your family." She smiled thinly. "Detective, you misunderstand. Those contracts were awarded through proper channels." "Really?" "Because the audit shows irregularities, and residents are growing suspicious. This isn't just about a helicopter anymore. This is corruption." Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Mark. You're poking into matters that could put you in danger." He leaned in. "Try me." Their conversation was cut short when Mark's phone buzzed urgently. A text flashed. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th. Come alone." The sender was anonymous. Curious and cautious, Mark excused himself and drove. To the address, the warehouse loomed dark and deserted in the night. Inside, a shadowy figure stepped forward. It was one of the vigilantes from the security footage. "You're digging too deep," the figure warned. "Back off, or the consequences will get ugly." Mark stood his ground. "I'm not scared of threats." The vigilante's voice dropped to a whisper. "Marjorie isn't working alone. There's someone higher up, someone pulling the strings. If you want to stop this, you need to find the real puppet master." Before Mark could respond, the vigilante disappeared into the shadows, leaving a single clue behind: a small metal key stamped with an unfamiliar emblem. Mark pocketed the key and headed back, mind spinning. The fight was bigger than a neighborhood dispute. It was a tangled web of lies, money, and power. Back home, Mark examined the key under his desk lamp. The emblem was a stylized M inside a circle, a logo he didn't recognize, but promised to lead him closer to the truth. As dawn broke, Mark knew one thing. The next moves had to be calculated and careful. The puppet master was watching, waiting for a misstep, and the helicopter, his symbol of justice, was still in the crosshairs. Mark Jensen stared at the small metal key in his palm, the unfamiliar emblem glinting in the early morning light. The stylized M inside a circle was unlike anything he'd seen before, but his instincts told him it was the next piece of the puzzle. He reached out to Detective Sarah Malik. "Got something you need to see. Meet me at the precinct." Sarah arrived within minutes. Her curiosity piqued. "That key could be the break we need." Mark laid the key on the table. "The vigilante left this behind. Says there's a puppet master, higher than Marjorie." Sarah nodded. "I'll run it through our databases." Meanwhile, Mark decided to revisit the warehouse where he'd met the vigilante. The place had been quiet during his last visit, but something told him he needed a closer look. As he stepped inside, the dusty air stirred. His flashlight beam flicked over old crates and rusted equipment. Near the back, he noticed a panel on the wall, too new to belong to an abandoned building. Mark pulled out the metal key. It fit perfectly into a small keyhole, concealed in the panel. With a soft click, the panel swung open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. Heart pounding, Mark descended carefully. The air grew cooler, the silence heavy. At the bottom, a small room glowed dimly from a bank of monitors, displaying security footage. Not just from Maplewood Lane, but from several neighborhoods, city streets, and even inside government buildings. Mark's breath caught. This was a surveillance hub, a nerve center for someone with vast reach. On a desk lay files marked with the same M emblem. Detailed dossiers on community leaders, law enforcement officers, and even local judges. Mark's eyes widened as he recognized names linked to recent scandals and unsolved crimes. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above. Mark ducked behind a crate as two figures entered. One was unmistakable, Marjorie, her expression unreadable but determined. The other was a man Mark hadn't seen before, tall, impeccably dressed, with piercing eyes that seemed to scan the room, like a predator. "This is where we keep control," the man said coldly. "Information is power," Marjorie nodded. "We can't let Detective Jensen disrupt the balance." Mark clenched his fists, realizing this was the puppet master the vigilante had warned about. The man's voice cut through the silence. "We need to move quickly. The helicopter is a threat to our operations." Marjorie glanced at the monitors, then back to the man. "He won't back down. What's the plan?" A cruel smile curled the man's lips. "We escalate." Mark's Mine raced. He had to get out and warn Sarah. Before it was too late, he silently slipped back up the stairs, heart hammering, as the door closed softly behind him. Outside, the dawn was breaking. Maplewood Lane was waking up to another day, oblivious to the shadow war unfolding beneath its streets. Mark called Sarah. I found their surveillance hub. Marjorie and a partner, the real puppet master, are running a covert operation. Sarah's voice was steady, but urgent. We need backup, and fast. As Mark hung up, he glanced back at the helicopter, battered but still standing. A beacon of justice, in a neighborhood consumed by secrets. The final showdown was looming. Detective Mark Jensen's pulse thundered in his ears as the SWAT team quietly surrounded the warehouse on 5th Street. The stakes were higher than ever. Marjorie and her mysterious partner, the real puppet master, had woven a web of corruption, intimidation, and destruction that threatened not only Maplewood Lane, but the entire city. Mark reviewed the plan with Detective Sarah Malik. We move in on my signal. Their operation centers here. We catch them red-handed. Sarah nodded grimly. Let's shut this down. The team advanced in the early dawn light, moving silently. Mark's mind raced, replaying the surveillance footage, the secret vault, the threats, and the repeated sabotage of his helicopter. Inside, Marjorie paced nervously, unaware the walls were closing in. Her partner, the impeccably dressed man with piercing eyes, was on the phone, arranging their next move to silence Mark once and for all. Suddenly, the warehouse doors crashed open. Police! Everyone down on the ground! Chaos erupted. Marjorie's eyes flashed with defiance, but she knew the game was up. The man beside her raised his hands in surrender, his cold smile replaced by something like resignation. Mark stepped forward, handcuffs ready. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment. Marjorie spat. You think this ends with us? You have no idea who you're messing with. Mark locked her wrists. I'm done guessing. The following weeks brought intense media attention. The HOA's corruption scandal unfolded, exposing kickbacks, surveillance, and illegal intimidation tactics aimed at neighbors and law enforcement alike. Mark's helicopter was repaired and returned to service, now a symbol of resilience and justice in Maplewood Lane. Yet the twist came during the final hearing, when Marjorie's partner's true identity was revealed. A high-ranking official within the city's government, leveraging power behind the scenes to manipulate communities and silence dissent. The revelation shocked the city. It sparked a wave of reforms aimed at transparency and community oversight. Mark, though weary, found renewed purpose. Maplewood Lane was still his home, still a place worth fighting for. One evening, as he walked past the now peaceful neighborhood park, his phone buzzed. A new message appeared. The game never ends. Stay vigilant. Mark smiled faintly, pocketing the phone. The battle for justice might never truly be over, but neither would he.